everyone, welcome back to my lair. This is S.C. Coleman, author, and in this video today we are going to be asking the question, what is Eric? So there's a couple elements here that use the name Eric, but it relates to a very particular, shall we say, database or clearinghouse for informational resources and communications within academia. And many of these other uses of the word Eric appear to be coordinated. Other than being an acronym with many meanings, it also appears to be, in some case, a code word or code name. Background to the ethical research involving children, ERIC project. The International ERIC Researchers research, here's some code words here, right? Researchers and research, that's the cover for many heinous activities. Young people, methodological contexts, and it includes all research in which children are taking part, irrespective of their role and methodology or methods used to collect, analyze, and report data or information. The value, emphasis placed on the value of importance and legitimacy of research. Others considered vulnerable is listed here, and the information is identified as sensitive. This lists the website as http, no S, just http://childethics.com. It's a repository of information for the international research community and stakeholders. Doesn't that sound like the ERIC that we've been talking about already? Repository of information for academia. Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC. Public charity nonprofit membership organization. Include 24 states and District of Columbia. Election officials from 7 states formed ERIC in 2012. From the Pew Charitable Trusts, 2 states to notice here are Delaware and Virginia. A full membership list is available on the About ERIC page. Each member jurisdiction has a representative. There's a bylaws and membership agreement, and the section about want to learn more about what a chief election official is. Members fund ERIC. New members pay a one-time membership fee of $25,000. Upgrades and other unanticipated expenses are listed. Annual dues based on citizen voting age population, and members approve their dues. Now, I don't know what that sounds like to you, but I don't believe that the context there requires much analysis to understand the motive and purpose of such a thing. Now, this is the statutes of share-ERIC concerning the building up and operations of the Survey of Health, Aging, and Retirement in Europe, SHARE, 10 December 2020. Now, you think about that word for a minute. Sharing information, and that's what these ERIC systems are all about. The contracting parties, it has a list here, they're stakeholders, you know, that nonsense, which is just more cover. Building on the current prototype of Survey of Health, Aging, and Retirement in Europe, SHARE, which has been selected by the ESFRI roadmap access to be upgraded as one of the central research infrastructure of the European research area. And of course, these usually are the same people selecting themselves to do things and whatnot, making it look like there's a collaboration. Recognizing that this new interdisciplinary, international, and longitudinal survey, with unprecedented quality regarding coherence, breadth, and international comparability, will in the future be of great significance in many different fields of fundamental and applied sciences, such as demography, economics, epidemiology, gerontology, biology, medicine, psychology, public health, health policy, sociology, and statistics. expecting other countries to participate in the activities undertaken together under the following statutes. Share shall have the legal form of the European Research Infrastructure Consortium, ERIC, incorporated under the provision of Council Regulation blah 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 from 25th of June 2009, be named Share ERIC, hereinafter referred to as the organization. Statutory seat of the organization shall be Munich, Germany, and working language will be in English. Share ERIC shall build an infrastructure of microdata of households and individuals necessary to understand individual and societal aging, hereinafter referred to as the survey. Its main tasks are to design a core survey instrument which captures the essential information on the economic, health, and family social conditions of life of individuals aged 50 and older and their partners. To administer the survey instrument every 2 years to a panel of respondents in each participating countries and to maintain contact to all panel members between panel waves, to assemble the collected information in a user-friendly database accessible to all scientific researchers subject to applicable data confidentiality restrictions, and to maintain this database including basic data cleaning, imputation, and documentation. Now the significance of what they're talking about here will become even more apparent with this next documents that we're going to read. Current prototype of Share shall be upgraded along 3 dimensions. Prolong Share over time in order to generate a genuine panel that follows individuals as they age and react to the changes in the social and economic environment. The upgrade will add even further waves every 2 years in 3 phases as defined in Article 10. Expand Share to include all EU member states. Increase sample size of Share in order to make the survey usable. Also, for in-country analysis in general, the target sample size shall be 6,000 individuals aged 50 and older in each member country. The Share ERIC shall pursue its tasks in a non-economic basis. Share shall be designed by researchers for researchers and be monitored by a scientific monitoring board. It also mentions the Supranational survey, and that's applicable considering the last video that I did. Now, under the scientific partner institutions, well, we'll skip that actually. That's not particularly necessary. They're what you would expect. It's a bunch of universities all collaborating together for some pretty insidious ends. Now this next document that we're going to look at, Community Engagement for Impact, CEFI, Framework on Evidence-Based Strategy to Facilitate Social Change. This is copyright 2023, published by Informa UK Limited, trading as Taylor and Francis Group, from the 27th of July 2023. Notice the words here, impact and community engagement. Strong pathways between researchers and communities. In disciplines lacking immediate or readily apparent sites for engagement, notice the word engagement is used in military contexts as either attack or defense. You're engaging. Researchers may struggle to build community connections. The framework provides examples of the types of concrete initiatives that disciplinary groups, researchers, and university administrators can pursue to help researchers successfully engage in CE. CE being, of course, community engagement. This lists action research, community connections, researcher dimension, and other duties, university dimension. Administrators can use CEFI to assess internal aspects, e.g. promotion processes, funding schemes, while disciplinary associations can use CFI to examine opportunities to foster engagement, conferences to open community-based delegates. And here you've got the very insidious and descriptive diagram. Up in the top left corner we have boards, community context, boards of directors, shareholders, and regulatory agencies. Down in the bottom left we've got governance context, accrediting bodies, granting agencies, and government. Over here to the right, we have research context, associations, rankings, and publishing industry. Now in the middle, the essential equilibrium, or the core of those, we have discipline, researcher, and university. The drivers influencing a community's decision to engage and to adopt research innovations sit outside the researchers for the university's locus of control. What are the community access points and approval processes for CE? Are community resources available to support proposed CE activities? What are community expectations of CE outcomes, data ownership? Does the community have capacity to enact change arising from CE? Now our next document carries the community engagement, or CE moniker further. Integrating community engagement into graduate education, reciprocal interaction between students and faculty and the public. Also, of course, mentions stakeholders as always, and that stakeholder work is relevant. Integrating community engagement into doctoral programs, national service learning and outreach organizations, deans, and of course, here we've got an interesting spelling of the word engagement. You have engage with a dash and then ment. So I don't know why they did that. That was not necessary. As you can see here, it was not a break. So, you know, when you have a sentence that starts on the next line, often there's a break and there's a dash. Well, not in this case. I don't know why they decided to spell it like that way there. Of course, service learning, as we will learn very quickly, is another cover, just like the word community engagement. It says there's a renaissance in community engagement. Numbers in students involved in service learning and community service. Of course, community service is also the term that they use for people to avoid quote-unquote jail time or whatnot. Community engagement is embedded in undergraduate academic programs. I think we all know what they're really talking about. The following recommendations are intended for deans, graduate program directors, and faculty interested in transforming doctoral programs to include engagement rather than a top-down or grassroots strategy. We suggest a multifaceted approach that simultaneously works in several directions. Carnegie Project's 5 developmental trajectories include developing independence, creativity, capacity, confidence, and responsibility. Of course, in this context, they are talking about themselves. Carnegie's Project 5 developmental trajectories are talking about the development or the overall mission that the universities have together in coordination for domination. The first one is developing independence. That's just like anybody would think of a Declaration of Independence, a universal declaration that they are now completely and fully autonomous and independent of anyone else. They are completely and utterly independent as far as a republic goes. So essentially what they're talking about is a republic of academia which dominates and controls everyone else. Create programs to train doctoral students to methods of applied research and participatory action research, as well as means of community data or needs analysis and asset mapping. Connect the university to policymakers and economic development efforts, making university campuses central and not peripheral to what is happening in their community, region, and state. So basically what I just said. If each graduate program considered adopting one community partner and beginning conversations with that partner about ways in which they might serve each other, students, faculty, and communities would reap significant benefits. And of course, as always, they're operating under coded language. Invest in infrastructure for community engagement, including curriculum developments, human resources, grant writing, and sharing of university resources. Analysis of faculty survey data from the last 4 decades suggests that we are moving toward greater stratification or unbundling of the faculty role. So they're basically just restating the same idea. They want to be in control of everything and completely and utterly independent from any outside influence or regulation. Campuses and natural associations need to recognize embedding community engagement within graduate education as a core strategy for future institutionalization of this work. Now the next document, community engaged learning, employers or imparting the skills employers seek. Community engaged learning is career preparation. Community engaged learning, CEL, stakeholders, refer to collect detailed descriptions of the behavior students practice during CEL, service learning, or nonprofit internship. And then this lists also a Center for Community Work and Learning. This work resulted in a better understanding of the intersection between career readiness and CEL, an additional justification for institutional prioritization of CEL, and a concrete vocabulary to assist students in communicating career skills gained from CEL experiences. So eventually coded language so that they don't get caught. Stakeholder groups include nonprofit community partners who supervise our service learning and community-based internship students, faculty who teach service learning courses, and undergraduate and master's students who participate in a service learning or our community-based internship programs. The students, of course, in this context are the foot soldiers to carry out their conquest. The front line, if you will. Now this gets into something interesting, more into the layered and technical aspects of these strategies. This is called the Delphi technique. ED number 064302. This is from the ERIC. All of these actually are from the ERIC system database. The Delphi technique is a method of eliciting and refining group judgments. That's exactly what that sounds like. The procedures used have three features: anonymous response, iteration and controlled feedback, and statistical group response. A series of experiments were initiated at RAND to evaluate the procedures. Upper class and graduate students were used as subjects and general information on the almanac type as subject matter. Two basic issues examined were: 1, comparison of face-to-face discussion with the controlled feedback interaction, and 2, a thorough evaluation of controlled feedback as a technique of improving group estimates. The results indicated that face-to-face discussion tended to make the group estimates less accurate, whereas the anonymous controlled feedback made the group estimates more accurate. Other results include insight gained into the nature of the group information process, and the fact that a meaningful estimate of the accuracy of a group response to a given question can be obtained by combining individual self-ratings of competence on that question into a group rating. It is concluded that the experiments represented a beginning of a field of research that could be called opinion technology. And of course, we're seeing the effects of that today in platforms like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and other areas where they are in fact doing exactly that. They are manipulating group judgments. There has been a somewhat intermittent series of studies at the RAND Corporation since its early days concerned with the problem of using group information more effectively. The earlier studies were concerned mainly with improving the statistical treatment of individual opinions. They indicated that some formal properties of individual estimates, precision, definiteness, could be used to rate the success of short-term predictions, and that background information as measured by a standard achievement test had a small but significant influence on the success of predictions. Both of these effects were fairly well washed out by combining estimates into group predictions. In 1953, Dahlke-Helmer 5 introduced an additional feature, namely iteration but with controlled feedback. The set of procedures that have evolved from this work has received the name Delphi, a somewhat misleading appellation since there is little that is ocular about the methods, or oracular. Gordon and Helmer's study of forecasting technological events. That particular study happened to coincide with a surge of interest in long-range forecasting itself, with an attendant interest in the systematic use of expert opinion. Go figure. In general, the Delphi procedures have three features: anonymity, controlled feedback, and statistical group response. Anonymity affected by the use of questionnaires or other formal communication channels such as online computer communications. In a way of reducing the effect of dominant individuals. Yeah, I wonder why they'd want to do that. Controlled feedback, conducting the exercise in a sequence of rounds between which a summary of the results of the previous round are communicated to the participants, is a device for reducing noise. Use of a statistical definition of the group response is a way of reducing group pressure for conformity, so groupthink and sheeple nonsense. At the end of the exercise, there may still be a significant spread in individual opinions. Probably more important, the statistical group response is a device to assure that the opinion of every member of the group is represented in the final response. Within these three basic features, it is, of course, possible to have many variations. It involves much less effort for a participant to respond to a well-designed questionnaire than, for example, to participate in a conference or to write a paper. A Delphi exercise, properly managed, can be a highly motivating environment for respondents. Finally, anonymity and group response allow sharing of responsibility that is refreshing and that releases from the respondents' inhibitions. So, as usual, reduction in liability. I believe all of these features of a Delphi exercise are desirable, especially if the exercise is conducted in the context of policy formation, where group acceptance is an important consideration. Yeah, and of course we know exactly why that purpose is important. Next, we have the Monterey Model for Micro-Business Special Education, Eric Moberg, Monterey Adult School, November 29, 2009. Here, this little blurb: 2 projects and a club of the Monterey Adult Transitions Program. The Bistro Project began as a suggestion of an associate superintendent who ran a similar project in the Boston area. The Greenhouse Project became as a proposal of the author who ran an agricultural class project in the San Mateo area. Both projects are funded by donations of the author for equipment and supplies with no increase in salaries or fixed costs incurred by MPUSD. The Young and Able Club is a proposed student activity club under the auspices of Monterey Peninsula College beginning in spring 2010 and will receive funds from the Monterey Peninsula College and require none from MPUSD. Both projects and the club are revenue positive for MPUSD in both the short and long term. MATP has historically, that's the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District. Wait, no, that's MPUSD. MATP is the Monterey Adult Transition Program. MATP has historically included a vocational training component, primarily categorically funded by Workability 1 Grant Award. MATP components added or proposed during the 2009-2010 school year include A, the Bistro Project, the Young and Able Club, and the Greenhouse Project, all as part of a new micro-business special education curriculum. The Bistro Project began in August 2009. It's a bake sale offering hot dogs and hamburgers on campus for donations. I think we all know what that means. The Young and Able Club is a proposed student activity club under the auspices of Monterey Peninsula College. The club will allow the MATP students who are currently enrolled at MPC to access college funds and college facilities. The access will also allow the MATP to move its Bistro Project from the MAS campus with a daytime population of less than 200 to the MPC campus with a daytime population of over 2,000. The club will receive funds from the MPC Student Activities Council and require no funds from the MPUSD. This is very obvious what they're doing here, I believe, and exploitation is certainly the key word here. The Greenhouse Project began in September of 2009. The MATP special education students participated in the planning and assembly of the greenhouse frame. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. They used quote-unquote special needs or mentally incapable individuals as free labor. Volunteer students from the California State University Monterey Bay assisting in placing the plastic cover over the structure in November of 2009. Construction of the greenhouse is scheduled to complete in December of 2009, so seeding can begin in January of 2010. The current plan is to grow tomatoes, strawberries, and herbs to sell at the Carmel Farmers Market, which reopens for the season in May. Boy, this is some specially heinous crap, isn't it? More recently, and more importantly, the World Bank took Dewey's experiential learning theory to Africa in its enterprise-based training for sub-Saharan youth in the University of Portland's micro-business marketing project, so more slave labor exploitation through other means. Sends marketing students out into the world to start their own micro-business as a class project that helps to develop the social integration in vocational special education touted by Story and Serto, also building on the experience of genuine learning theory of Dewey. In conclusion, MATP students deserve the 2 projects and club to enjoy at least 1 year experimental status due to their strong scientific research basis, their successful beginnings, and their positive revenue flow for MPUSD. And of course, they're going to act like that is appropriate payment for services rendered, because that's what they always do. Bunch of thieves and liars and usurpers. International JI on e-learning 2022, a surprising navigation, the emergence of the lodestone model for specialized learning design through the creation of OCTBR, a Creative Commons licensed course development tool for health science learning. Patience Wayland, University of North Texas, USA, and David Del Pino Cloquis, University of Houston, USA. The lodestone model, named for the metal used in early compasses, is a pilot model to design and deploy innovative solutions for specialized learners. At an AHSC or other health science graduate program, learners are enrolled in fields such as medicine, nursing, dental, pharmacy, or veterinary studies. We specifically work closely with faculty and learners in medicine, nursing, and in 5 allied health fields: nutrition, physical therapy, occupational therapy, respiratory therapy, and clinical laboratory sciences. Regardless of field, health science learners must typically drink from a fire hose during a didactic phase of learning while they memorize many new terms, functions, and ideas. After a year or more, these learners move to clerkships or field work. They are still learning, but through a practical phase of applying their knowledge as apprenticed health providers. During this clinical learning phase, many will accept placements across city or state, including in rural areas where there are few options for healthcare and high-speed net access may be spotty. The campus learning management system and its courses in complementary systems such as Tegrity Campus, Panopto, or VoiceThread are often critical in keeping teaching and mentoring relationships alive during a time that is emotionally as well as intellectually challenging for the learners. Hospital personnel, including those who are apprentice learners, are often using technology for crucial patient needs 24/7. Unfortunately, this may also mean that the technical departments providing help desk support may not be structured to help specialized learners engaged in didactic learning or based away from the AHSC's home, hospital, or clinics, including those engaged in blended learning or completely online courses and programs. We found that students at our former AHSC were acutely aware of this and repeatedly made comments about limited support or teaching myself on my own. Another set of learners, the faculty and staff who are using learning technologies to teach and lead didactic students in apprenticeships or professional learners. Training from the back and offering an optional workshop on new digital trends particularly offered insight into our faculty, colleagues, and their attitudes about how they and their students were supposed to learn. Two of us both manage multiple learning systems as front-end administrators: our learning management system, Tegrity, VoiceThread, survey collection software, and the Ensemble video media management system, in addition to providing instructional design to help several medical and allied health programs, residencies, and tracks. Many online learners at the AHSC use the learning management system as their main link to the learning community. Student resources were added as part of the OCTBR design. Counseling resources, student services, and time management aids were mapped as a list of reusable links that could be easily ported in through the existing learning management system and copied to multiple courses in minutes. After we presented on the tool in regional state conferences, it was adopted by graduate programs at another AHSC. Sharing it as a Creative Commons licensed tool online, we have since heard from clinical educators outside of the United States who find it helpful for their course development. Equipping would then be a matter of not only running another scope strategy for a specialized field if needed, but also pairing discerned requirements with stakeholders, knowledge, and resources that have already existed. Now this document is from 2015, or copyrighted then anyway. Using immersive virtual reality for electrical substation training. Abstract. Usually, distribution electricians are called upon to solve technical problems found in electrical substations. In this project, we applied problem-based learning to a training program for electricians with the help of a virtual reality environment that simulates a real substation. Using the virtual substation, the users may safely practice maneuvers with varying degrees of complexity. To improve the user's sense of immersion, the interactive devices such as the Oculus Rift virtual reality headset are going to be adopted. The project stakeholders had a good impression of the device and believe that the proposed methodology will improve the training and affect positively the electrician's performance. reducing accidents inside the substation area and decreasing the time required to reestablish the power supply after a failure. The electrical power system consists of power generation, transmission, and distribution networks, and load consumption. The power generation is the origin of the electrical energy. A transmission network is composed of high voltage power lines, which drive electric power from a generation station to a load center area, as they are usually far apart for long distances. A distribution system has medium and low voltage networks and conducts electrical energy from the transmission system to industrial, commercial, and residential loads. These sections of the electric power system are linked by electrical substations. Their function is to reduce or increase the voltage levels in order to supply correctly each section of the system, thereby establishing a connection between the power generation and transmission system on the one hand and the transmission and distribution system on the other. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 2011. The substation has the electrical and protection equipment necessary to transform power with safety and efficiency and offer an adequate power quality to the customers of the distribution system. A substation comprises transformers, regulators, circuit breakers, disconnectors, monitoring equipment, protection relays, electrical buses, and others. Since this facility is a fundamental section of the electrical system, it is very important to maintain its proper operation. Thus, if there is a problem in the substation after an electrical fault in its area, the site may be repaired as soon as possible. As a result, the customers would not have energy supply interrupted for a long period, and damages to the power grid or equipment of the customers could be avoided. Electricians allowed to work on substations are the professionals who respond in most events of technical problems in distribution substations in a local electric utility. A VR environment not only capable of representing and simulating a real or fictional environments, but also making users feel like they are physically present in those places. In order to be more effective and let users focus on the tasks that must be performed, the VR environment must be immersive. Usually, immersion can be achieved by covering the whole field of vision and the user or of the user with a head-mounted display or HMD. Other simulators offer a more realistic experience. As a virtual substation, both simulators aim to train new technicians to control and or operate an electrical substation or a power plant. So the facilities were modeled in 3D in order to look like a real substation and power plant. In fact, it is possible to interact with most equipment through joysticks and VR glasses. But the look and feel of these simulators is not as realistic as the project presented in this paper demands. To deliver the required realism, a real substation should be represented in the VR environment, containing accurate 3D models of all equipment and simulating the exact behavior of them. Moreover, as immersion is a must-have, HMD support is also required. To fulfill these requirements, the Unreal Engine Epic Games 2015 was chosen, as it can render high-quality graphics, is compatible with HMD, and is very active and supportive community. In addition, the selected HMD for this project was Oculus Rift, Oculus 2015, as it is one of the most promising technologies available at the time that this paper was written, with a reasonable support and rich online documentation. As the HMD covers the user's field of vision, using a keyboard and a mouse could be a bit clumsy. Gesture-based user interfaces could provide a more natural interaction with the VR environment and are still under analysis by the authors. Although this is a work in progress project, it does have a few valuable results. At the time that this paper was written, about half 3D models of the equipment were designed and integrated into the VR environment. Figure 1 shows some of the models already included in the VR environment. As there were some 3D placeholders in the environment instead of models and real equipment, some stakeholders were not able to envision the substation correctly, indicating that the placeholders are not easy to understand. Therefore, the design of the 3D models was reprioritized and became a high priority task for the development and graphics teams. Other interactive devices, for instance those with motion detection, are under analysis to improve the experience in the VR environment. The project presented in this paper receives support from the Electrical Utility, CPFL, Paulista, and is part of the Technical Research and Development Program of Brazilian Electrical or Electricity Regulatory Agency. Now, this next document, Theoretical Framework for Educational Assessment and Synaptic Review. This is from 2016. Faculty of Letters and Humanities, Ibn Zohar University, P.O. Box 29S, High Adakla, Agadir, Morocco. At this age of accountability, it is acknowledged that assessment is a powerful lever that can either boost or undermine students' learning, like service learning, or community engagement. Assessments remain inhibitory or avoid rather than constructive as these lack the assessment formative aspect. It's not well understood or not done in a principled educational framework across all education levels. This is due to some inherited dysfunction of the past which calls for the urgency of a moratorium. Classroom assessment research is listed here as CAR, C-A-R. And educational assessment here henceforth EA. To begin with, the terms like evaluation, measurement, and testing have been closely associated with and related to assessment. They are even sometimes used interchangeably as means used to gather information on student learning. The term assessment is commonly used with a variety of different meanings. Indeed, the term has come to be used so widely in many different ways in the field of language testing and educational measurement that there seems to be no consensus on what precisely it means. For the purpose of this thesis, assessment is operationally defined as part of the educational process where faculty instructors appraise students' achievements by collecting, measuring, and analyzing, synthesizing, and interpreting relevant information about a particular object of interest in their performance under controlled conditions in relation to curricular objectives set for their levels and according to the procedures that are systematic and substantively grounded. These people need some instruction on how to properly and grammatically form phrases and sentences. Systematic evaluations are conducted to ascertain how well education system is functioning. Teachers usually assess students and use this assessment information to judge the quality of students' learning for summative or formative purposes. Tests are used to measure how much a student has learned in a given course or subject by means of more or less formal, systematic methods of assessment used to determine students' knowledge with regard to predetermined content. Most often these methods require the use of paper and pencil instruments designed to elicit some definite behavior, knowledge, or skill from the test taker. The value of EA lies in its judgmental and instructive roles for both authorities and individuals. From the perspective of authorities, assessments allow people in charge of assessment to get instructive insights about three critical functions: selecting, monitoring, and holding accountable. Assessment results, along with other measurements, data such as those obtained through periodic surveys, are valuable tools for educational institutions. They assist in evaluating the effectiveness of institutional practices by tracking the functioning of different components of the assessment system, generally referred to as national assessments, sometimes holding the individuals responsible for those components accountable, contributing to decision-making about the functioning of departments, programs, and curricula, and providing potential measures to be taken to improve all the cornerstones of an educational system. Can also play a role in planning and budgeting and in faculty rewards. It also allows departments or division heads to evaluate the effectiveness of entire programs and allows faculty to determine what and how well students are learning and how effective are both their instructional and assessment practices are to their students and accountability measures set by their education system. From the perspective of the individuals, good assessments assist teachers in evaluating the effectiveness of their teaching, providing them with a framework to fine-tune teaching methods. It also monitors students' progress and achievement, determines the performance levels of individual students and teachers, and controls program evaluation and curriculum review in order to improve instruction and teacher effectiveness. That's just one paragraph. Now it's got this hierarchical diagram laid out, and I'll only list the references. Educational assessment goes to decision and policy, which goes to district policy, state policy, and national policy. So they write the laws, essentially. Decision, well, they write what's enforced. That's the big one. So you can have a law that's dead letter. This stuff's not dead letter because it is actively being enforced. It's coming from academia. That's a very important distinction. Nobody elected them, nobody approved them, nobody wants them to be running their lives, and yet they are. Educational assessments also goes to decisions about students, which includes classifying students. That's an interesting wording there. Counseling and guidance, selecting students, and credentializing and certifying students. Examples of types of educational decisions for which assessments may be used. These assessments may assist instructors in making judgments about students' behavior and academic performance. as well as diagnosing their strengths and weaknesses, which in turn may result in adjustments within the classroom in the form of remedial work or referral for outside assistance. Outside assistance. Assessment can also serve to provide feedback to students by measuring their progress, giving them an idea of their degree of non-mastery of the content taught to them in relation to others or to a norm or a standard. Instructors can use assessment to place students in groups for behavioral, social, and/or instructional purposes. For a comprehensive assessment effort to function, governmental officials must gain a thorough understanding of its overall effectiveness, as well as the effectiveness of individual programs accredited, made parts of their policy, and curriculum being offered to national or local educational institutions. Therefore, assessments are hierarchically set in a top-down model, each feeding the other. National assessments and institutional or school classroom assessments, the latter will be explored in detail as the main concern of this dissertation. The purpose of such an assessment and the credentials of the board or group responsible for it should guide these assessments. There are historical perspectives that run from the back to basic movements in the 1970s, through the minimum competency movement in the 1980s, and the growth of standardized testing in the 1990s, especially in USA, to the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in USA in 2001, and the move to the introduction of alternative modes of assessment. Despite this ubiquity, or perhaps because of it, what constitutes a good or appropriate assessment in education has proven to be a highly contentious question, the answer to which have ranged considerably depending on the purposes, uses, users, and contexts for assessment. Indeed, even arriving at a definition of assessment invites disagreement, with some arguing sharp technical distinctions among terms like assessment, measurement, and evaluation and testing, and others contending that each of these terms can be defined identically, at least within education, as a process by which educators use students' responses to specially created or naturally occurring stimuli in order to make inferences about students' knowledge, skills, or effective status. By assessing authentic, complex performances that samples student work, it has been argued teachers and students will focus on valued learning outcomes as opposed to figuring out how to score well on test items that have little to do with such outcomes. In response, others have emphasized perceived problems with reliability, domain sampling, population biases, and related concerns, in suggesting that such alternative assessments may not provide the most appropriate alternatives. With the increasing emphasis on classroom assessment, there is a growing movement towards balanced assessment systems. Local, within an institution, assessment systems can provide more detailed information about individual students that can be used to improve instruction. Relatively little research on validity and reliability of such assessment systems. In fact, there is little data to show whether teachers are aware of specific components, are applying them appropriately in the classroom, and are meeting the recommended standards. Some theorists believe that teachers' assessment literacy is limited. They receive little training in classroom assessment, claims that a teacher's assessment grading practices are highly variable. And of course, I also like the word there of meeting recommended standards. I think we all know what that means. Classroom assessments have a decided advantage over centralized assessments in that the results are immediately available to the teacher and presumably the learners, and can influence the course of instruction for both. While these assessments can play an important role in the promotion to the next grade, they are rarely used for high-stakes decisions such as admission to the next level of the educational system. National assessments are said to be in the service of decisive policies, as they are running evaluations on a detailed but global basis, attempting to get deeper into accountability concerns. Wait, did I just read that? I know I just read this part, which says, prior to the mid-1980s, assessment literature focused almost exclusively on large-scale standardized testing. These early studies noted that teachers were using selected response items most frequently, and most questions sampled factual and conceptual knowledge. 1980, essays were less than 1% of the test items, and few test questions required students to apply their learning. These studies were done before mandatory standardized testing, the movement towards authentic assessment, and most contemporary school reform. It is not surprising that there are as many graduating practices and systems as there are teachers. They suggest principles for effective grading, which include the following: grading expectations for performance and achievement need to be clear and explicit with their descriptors of the targets. Communication of these expectations must be clear to the student as well as other stakeholders, such as the parents and administrators. All students need to be treated fairly, and expectations need to be reasonable, and grading should support, enhance, and inform the instructional process. The importance adds to this list the importance of aligning instructional strategies with grading policies and the use of valid and sufficient data collected over time. In 1997, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Educational Research studied 16 schools to clarify the nature and effects of performance assessment, and found that schools had multiple purposes in using performance assessment, that forms and formats vary tremendously, and that teachers use different types of scoring methods, stressing that the efficacy of using performance assessments lies in its potential to raise both students' and teachers' motivation to learn through research projects and other performance-based assignments than they are with other types of assignments. They concluded by saying there is sometimes a lack of clarity in performance measures and standards. To improve its value, they recommended validity and reliability to be strengthened, rubrics to be used, and adequate resources, professional development, and support be provided. A language teacher uses assessment results formatively to 1. Review students' work by identifying their weaknesses and strengths with regard to the objectives set for instruction, and not only to give final marks or grades. Increase communication and collaboration between instructor and students by tracking and improving student learning on the basis of collecting feedback on effectiveness of and student satisfaction with classroom activities and teaching. Promote the course teaching and learning to meet students' needs by evaluating curriculum goals, instructional strategies, programs, and instructional effectiveness. And finally, ensure some necessary changes and potential interventions that need to be made during the instructional process. For the effective monitoring system that provides charted data, they describe some guiding criteria for high-quality assessment. A few of these are measurement and important learning outcomes, measurement that address important educational decisions, measurement that is compatible with a variety of instructional models, clear descriptions of students' performance can be linked in instruction, easy administration, scoring, and interpretation, a process that communicates learning goals to teachers and students, a system that generates accurate and meaningful information. Other scholars believe that classroom assessment should reflect real-life tasks and require students to utilize higher-order thinking skills to fulfill on-demand duties and tasks. This gave birth to another assessment approach known as contextual authentic assessment, CAA, advocating that these assessments should require intellectually worthy tasks, mere best instructional activities, and consist of ill-structured challenges that are similar to the complex ambiguities of life, assess a wider range of learning outcomes, use a wider range of types of assessment tasks, and assess in more authentic contexts. I think we know what that means. Grounding, test purpose, development, brief, resource constraints, initial testing, development, define construct, develop specifications to operationalize construct, develop and revise tasks, develop and revise assessment criteria, development of administration procedures, selection and training of raters, training of admin staff, creation of admin documents. Operational administration, administer the test according to set procedures, gather performance, get performance rated according to set procedures, and report scores. Monitoring and maintenance, analyze and archive tasks for future use, monitor rater and test form reliability, obtain regular feedback, evaluate the test performance, and any need for revision. And of course, most people reading this will probably think that this is entirely limited to the quote-unquote educational environment, which it is not. It's also limited to governance. And limited to, quote-unquote, I'm using limited in a sarcastic form, many other areas, such as the military. Now let's get into that. Education versus training, a military perspective, military service members, opportunity colleges, Washington, D.C. Now when they say military perspective here, they do not mean that this is coming from the military. What they mean is that it's a perspective on the military, but it's designed in such a way that it imparts the perspective that this is actually coming from the military, which it's not. Civilian educators have long argued that the U.S. Armed Forces must be maintained as a reflection of society, and that civilian education institutions must share responsibility in educating service members. Political changes and technological advances have made education a strategic issue in structuring military forces for the third millennium. Some military leaders recognize that service members need intellectual ability along with military skills. And this is the date for this is 1997. There is a natural tension between military trainers and those who advocate civilian educational opportunities for service personnel. This paper focuses on various aspects of the education versus training issue. Military training, as used here, refers to the military's job-oriented training aimed at the accomplishment of tasks associated with the military mission. Education as used here means education as it is normally understood in academia and is what is intended by Congress to be provided by the DoD Voluntary Education Program. These authors examine the purpose and development of adult and continuing education within the military corporate body and describe the education versus training issue in the context of the partnership between the United States higher education community and the military services. Education is a strategic issue in restructuring the military forces for the third millennium. Training for any purpose now will be effective only if the trainee is adequately educated. The lines formerly drawn between those who need education and those who need training have become blurred, if not irrelevant. Education without training in the combat arms has always been correctly understood as folly in the military. Now the military must come to grips with the fact that we cannot train the uneducated. Once trained to perform in support of military missions, a service member must also be an educated person. Critical thinking and interpretive skills based in both broad and technical education are requirements of the modern battlefield and the peacetime environments into which we place enlisted personnel as well as officers. Now I'm going to make a note here, as I've said multiple times in my other videos. Critical thinking is used but with the definition of analytical thinking. And that is done with the intent so that when somebody hears critical thinking, what they think is analytical thinking, but what they actually do is criticize instead of analyze. That's very important. So there's no thought process, just base criticism for no reason other than people have been trained to critically think rather than analytically think or process information appropriately. And I don't use appropriately in the way they would use the word appropriately either. This promise is only meaningful if the recruit has a legitimate opportunity to advance beyond military training to college-level coursework and degree programs. And of course that tells you the perspective of the individual who clearly has no value for, military training because it requires advancement beyond such a thing. This is a major strategic issue. You love how many times they use the word strategic? Former military training described above represents only a small fraction of the overall training effort when compared to training that occurs outside the military training base, as service members serve in their units and hone their skills and knowledge essential for the performance of their military jobs. The military might be described as a huge, highly specialized, complex corporation that seeks to train its personnel to accomplish tasks associated with the corporate mission. I wonder why they would want to redefine the military as corporate, without, of course, using the rather humorous term mercenary. Develop those selected through a systemic career progression as service members are prepared for higher skill levels and greater leadership opportunities. This is a vitally important corporate goal that serves the national interest. Individual education that occurs in this process is secondary and must be handled with sophistication and care. Military learning is carefully assessed by those who teach the same subject matters in academia, and appropriate academic credit is recommended by the American Council on Education, 1996. The process here is very important. The corporation is not in the education business, it is educators, products of and active participants in the process of academia who determine the academic creditworthiness of learning. Adult and continuing education in the military performs three basic functions. First, it supports recruitment, retention, and job placement. Hence, it serves a military personnel management function. Second, it supplements and complements military training. Hence, it serves a military training or operations function. And third, it helps fulfill individual human aspirations for education, hence it serves a human resource development function. The belief is reflected in the struggle over which military staff agency should serve as the proponent for adult and continuing education. This struggle is largely over whether or not adult continuing education is a function integral to military training or something to be kept separate and distinct. This is a classic battle for the soul of voluntary education in the military. Education adds diversity to training programs. Education should be integrated with training programs and benefit from duty scheduling. The education system must be integrated with the military personnel management function and be a direct support for the recruiting effort. It must be perceived by individual soldiers as both voluntary and personalized in nature. This is reflected in recruiting publicity and should at all costs maintain the credibility of our advertising. That's exactly what that sounds like. Training goals and objectives of an organization or an employer often differ from the educational needs and personal aspirations of the employee, or in this case, the service member. Billions of dollars are spent for military training. The fear among educators is that the military trainers might divert scarce educational resources to supplement those billions to pay for and manage military training. Marine Corps Commandant General Charles Krulak has recognized this. He emphasizes intellectual agility as an attribute essential for his Marines. First of all, they're not his Marines. And second, if there even was a General Charles Krulak, and that's not just simply a fiction designed with false identity and paid actors, then the individual would be similar to the Mattis character, I expect, basically being traitorous and selling out, quote-unquote, their Marines. Marine General Krulak's understanding of intellectual agility is an exception. That's not a surprise there. Rather than absorb or reduce education dollars, commanders and senior civilians in the Defense Department budget process are better advised to treat education programs as the foundation for combat training and military leadership. And anybody involved in that should be hanged or shot. Vocational educational programs that develop specific technical skills and knowledge needed by military personnel enhance warfighting capabilities. Military trainers can readily identify with these programs and courses since they look and smell similar to military job training conducted in military service schools. They, of course, could not be any more degrading, or they could be more degrading, but they are, of course, very degrading towards military personnel. And in every way, they attempt to demean by using the word in quotation marks, smell, like dogs. Thousands of military jobs have civilian counterparts, such as military police or food service specialists. A licensed practical nurse is basically the same in a civilian hospital as in a military hospital. And of course, they're trying to demean the impact more, as they always do. And the main conflict here, but not listed, is the oath of allegiance to the U.S. Constitution. That is the specific element they want to remove. Adult and continuing education can inspire service members to reach out and make a future for themselves and their families. Obviously, with the suggestion that being in the military has no future. The human being needs to be able to gather and digest essential information, make decisions based on information, take action, receive the results of that action, gather additional information and make more decisions, take action, etc. Till the objective or goal is accomplished or the battle is won. Service members on the extended battlefield of the 21st century cannot function merely as trained robots. If treated as such by their trainers, these warriors will be woefully inadequate on a modern, highly technical battlefield. Yeah, because they're obviously the ones to be the judges of that. Adult and continuing education can hone service members' ability to think and to persevere. These are essential qualities both for maintaining the peace and for prevailing in future conflict, with of course the insinuation that those things are not accomplished by quote-unquote military training. Because voluntary activity, autonomous learning, critical thinking, and the questioning that inevitably accompanies broadened knowledge and the understanding are at odds with the age-old image of the ideal warrior, it is no surprise that the proponents of adult and continuing education in the military are often challenged by powerful forces in the military. Yeah, that's because they're attempting to institute treason. It is the responsibility of these proponents to meet these challenges when they arise and make the case that in spite of the natural tension between them, education as well as training is needed in the modern military. The trouble is that a high school diploma does not guarantee mastery of basic skills, certainly not the so-called higher order of basic skills. ability to think and reason, problem solving, etc. Some with diplomas still cannot read and write well enough to succeed in advancing training and specialty job performance in our modern military establishment. These unfortunates, like generations before them that joined the nation's services to do something with their lives unattainable in the civilian world, still need basic skills. This stuff is so insulting. But it could, of course, be more insulting. Yes, they are capable of that. There may be fewer of them in the past, but this need has not entirely disappeared and perhaps never will. The lowest academic layer of the new recruit population may never be able to take advantage of educational opportunity. The military will do well to improve basic skills enough to ensure basic training. Many of the nation's high school graduates who elect to join the military are not ready for what is generally considered college-level work. If it is true that the military of the future should consist of college-capable people, whether or not developmental courses should be required becomes a real issue. Strong advocacy for the education of service members is needed. The advocacy, like General Krulak's intellectual ability, must be based upon a deep understanding of both the symbiosis and the differences between voluntary post-secondary education and military training. Also needed is a vigorous partnership between the Department of Defense and higher education, service members, opportunity colleges, and the several projects and programs are uniquely restructured and maintained at the National Center for Higher Education for this purpose, as are the Military Evaluation Program and Military Installation Voluntary Evaluation Review (MIVER) project at the American Council on Education. Continue to even increase support for and advocacy of such institutions will help to make certain that the fragile but symbiotic relationship between military training and higher education continues to work effectively in the interest of both military institution and the individual military learner. One, educational program are properly situated and advocated in the policy-making structure. They must be carefully monitored by all concerned. Finally, it is essential that adult education opportunities be provided in the military for those service members with basic educational deficiencies. Their educational needs need to be identified and the associated issues be addressed at policy-making levels so that the military services can get on with the educational programs in this area that they will work. And of course, in the next document, we'll see just how that treasonous operational plan is affected in the operational capabilities of rifle marksmanship in the U.S. Marine Corps. Review of Rifle Marksmanship Training Research, January 2011. Review of Rifle Marksmanship Training Research, CRESST Report 783, Gregory KWK, Chung Sam O Nagashima, Gurley C. Delacruz, John J. Lee, Richard Wayness, and Ava L. Baker, CRESST/University of California, Los Angeles. January 2011, National Center for Research on Evaluation Standards and Student Testing, CRESST, Center for the Study of Evaluation, CSE, Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, University of California, Los Angeles, blah, blah, blah. Copyright 2011, the Regents of the University of California. The work reported herein was supported under the Naval Postgraduate School Award number, blah, 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 N00244-081-0044, as administered by the Naval Postgraduate School. The findings and opinions expressed in this report do not necessarily reflect the positions or policies of the Naval Postgraduate School. Of course not, but I guarantee that this crap is going to be imposed into the Marine Corps by the various treasonous factions in the upper cadre, the brass, if you will, who are taking their orders from academia. In Section 2, we examine USMC combat marksmanship because the USMC combat marksmanship program, CMP, including movement targets, is new. There is no current research that we know of that has specifically examined assessment of CMP elements, and we thus identify assessment issues. Now, first off, to note here, they're going to repeat multiple times that it's a quote-unquote new program and there is no research on it. That's, of course, coded language, because what their true purpose is, as we will read, is to, as usual, undermine the fighting capabilities of the, as referenced before, corporate body of military mercenary forces, not constitutionally sworn protectors of the people. Rifle marksmanship is a core value of the Marine Corps. No, it's not. The creed, every Marine is a rifleman, that's not a creed, embodies the value of a Marine's place on marksmanship. The Marines' competitive marksmanship program has consistently generated world-class shooters since its inception. I have no idea what they're talking about. Every Marine must qualify in a rifle at least as a marksman, or it is unlikely he or she will be promoted. That's not true. Every Marine, well, actually none of this is true. Everything that I just cited is not true. It is patently false from every possible concept or perspective. There is no way that you can argue truth in this crap. But more importantly, if a Marine fails to qualify at the range, they get kicked out of the Marine Corps, regardless of promotion. One of the most remarkable achievements in USMC marksmanship training and weaponry is in the developing of a shooter's skill to routinely hit a 19-inch circle area at 500 yards in the prone position. That would be remarkable if that wasn't also false, because the 19-inch circle is not the target used at 500 yards. Some exceptions apply based on the experience of rank, such as Marines with 20 years or more of active duty, colonels and above, sergeant major or mastery gunnery sergeants in Seawell 4 and 5. Of course, they're referencing their ridiculous remark that failing to shoot affects promotion. There has been little effort to understand rifle shooting as a complex skill as opposed to other sports. Rifle shooting is not a sport. Baseball, tennis, etc. Isn't that nice? They compare shooting in the Marine Corps to tennis and baseball. The basic set of relationships among posturally stability, rifle handling, distance, and weather were established by World War I. That doesn't mean World War I established them. It says they were established, quote unquote, by the time World War I started. So essentially that entire historical period before World War I established, as it says, postural stability, rifle handling, distance, and weather. That's a ridiculous statement to make. Well, among all the other crap that's in this and all the other documents. Studies that have explicitly attempted to predict rifle performance have been conducted in the context of evaluating how well performance on a rifle simulator relates to actual record fire performance on the firing range. Alright, stuff's just mind-bogglingly stupid. It would give anybody who has any practical experience in this a headache to read this crap. But that, of course, is the important point of this, is that this stuff is being done by people who, first of all, don't know what they're talking about, and second of all, it is being imposed regardless of any dissension or any resistance by those who have the practical experience. A complementary approach that A complementary approach that we have adopted is to conceptualize the domain of rifle marksmanship performance as a function of skill and environment. The environment component is composed of two factors that are uncontrollable: equipment and environment. How can you have environment composed into the environment component? That's redundant. Unfortunately, shooting has not been conceptualized as a skilled sport, and there has been little in the way of theoretical development to point to the set of important variables or processes underlying skilled shooting performances. Of course, they would want to undermine the shooting capability of the Marine Corps. It's essentially the last piece to fall in their attempted conquest of the country. And if they attempted to do it without undermining the shooting capabilities and fighting capabilities of the Marine Corps, then a lot of Marines would be effective resistance. And they can't have that. By extension, prior research provides little specific guidance on which variables to measure. Ambush. The ambush method is used when it is difficult to track the target with the rifle while in the prone or sitting position. This lead required to effectively engage the target determines the engagement point. With the sight settled, the target moves into the predetermined engagement point and creates the desired sight picture. The trigger is pulled simultaneously with the establishment of sight picture. And that's not true. As anybody knows, if you try to fire at the silhouette of a moving target, your bullet will be behind them by the time it arrives. Ugh. There are a few modifications to the fundamentals of marksmanship when engaging moving targets. Rather than aiming at the target's center of mass, sight picture is based on target's range, speed, and angle of movement. Aiming in prematurely is incorrect. When there are targets to aim at while in a combat situation, I think what they're talking about, those shots should be delivered immediately. If a Marine is moving already aimed in, he will not be aware of his surroundings. Most importantly, he will not be constantly aware of the position of friendlies and or other threats. And that is not true. This stuff is quite ridiculous. And you can laugh about it, but it's not really laughable when you realize that this stuff is actively being imposed in the armed forces by academics. Well, actually, by the brass, but they're taking orders from academics. They're not taking orders from a commander-in-chief, and they're not taking orders from a secretary of defense, and they're not taking orders from the people. They're taking orders from university academics sitting in their, well, they are sitting in their ivory towers, but more importantly, if you think about it in that context, then you miss the fact that this stuff is having physical, real damage to our country and to the nation, with the intrinsic motive of taking it over and fully dominating it from an academic republic. It is treason. In contrast to known distance rifle marksmanship, the USMC combat marksmanship program is new. Again, they keep repeating this. And thus there has been little assessment research conducted to develop measures that can capture the processes underlying skills performance on CMP tests, which less lead to prediction of performance. And here in this document we get together the one document talking about control through assessment, and the second document talking about the strategic importance of education in the military. They, in fact, as we can see in this document alone, attempting to supplant military training and take it over in their paradigm. A first step is to conduct a cognitive task analysis to determine the set of cognitive, motor, and affective variables bear on performance. For example, the base knowledge needs to be identified from subject matter experts in doctrine, which of course they'll design. Phase 2 will focus on identifying the knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSAs, associated with combat marksmanship, including task scenarios, and will exercise the range of KSAs. Now, one mark of the academic is that they love to over-vocabularize or use excessive language to describe something simple. Another thing they love to do is make unnecessary acronyms and then use that throughout everything else and refer to everything in the form of an acronym. And of course we see them doing that here, but it's very obvious with quote-unquote AI, artificial intelligence. That's a product of academia. Two methods will be used to generate validity evidence regarding the efficacy of the sensor-based model of skill performance and known distance rifle marksmanship. A multi-trait, multi-method matrix, and predictive validity. The multi-trait, multi-method matrix, MTMM, is an approach to assessing the construct validity of a single or a set of measures in study. Using MTMM measures, the MTMM matrix. I believe that's redundant because I believe they said multi-trait, multi-method matrix, MTMM. So that ends with matrix. So when they say the MTMM matrix, they're actually saying the multi-trait, multi-method matrix. This stuff's so wacky, it's almost hard to believe it's true. Leveraging work on USMC basic rifle marksmanship, known distance since Phase 1. Phase 2 will address the transition of known distance sensing technology, e.g. CRE-SST's current sensing system or NPS project developed systems for use in moving target marksmanship and close combat tactical maneuvering. There are 4 objectives in Phase 2: define knowledge, skills, and abilities specific to moving target combat rifle marksmanship and close combat tactical maneuvering. Define the scenario-based tasks aligned to desired outcomes for moving target combat rifle marksmanship and close combat tactical maneuvering. Now I can of course save you the trouble on that. The desired outcomes is for the weakening of the fighting capability of the Marine Corps and Marines individually, as well as if not the entire veteran body and the entire population of the country. Phase 3 involves the development of an assessment ontology and the validation of sensor-based measures and assessment tasks. In known distance marksmanship training, the target is static with relatively little change in the environment from shot to shot. On the other hand, moving targets and tactical maneuvering situations are never the same. As a result, a statistical approach must be employed that captures intrinsic differences in difficulty across various scenarios. One such approach is with the use of item repository theory, IRT. IRT analysis enables the estimation of difficulty levels of each scenario so that the scenarios can be weighed, resulting in increased accuracy in model building and estimation. And now that we've understood that load of crap, we have a better idea of exactly what academia is doing, and more to the point, the true extent of their treason and their knowledgeable and willful operations, that anybody assisting them in carrying these activities out is doing so with an adverse motive for veterans, military component, the population, and reducing the security of a free state as mentioned in the Second Amendment.